In the dense and shadowy jungles of Vietnam, where the heat and humidity suffocated every soldier, an invisible and relentless enemy lurked. During the 1960s and 1970s, the Vietcong and the North Vietnamese Army designed deadly traps meant to demoralize, maim, and kill unsuspecting American soldiers. Beyond conventional weapons, these ingenious and cruel traps symbolized a psychological war where fear became a tool of control. Every step in the jungle labyrinth could mean the difference between life and death, forcing soldiers to face not just an army, but a lethal, ever-changing territory. What horrors did the Vietcong commit against American soldiers? The Vietcong, origin of the nightmare for American soldiers. At the heart of the Vietnam War, the Vietcong emerged as an insurgent force whose strategy would redefine modern combat. Officially known as the National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam, NLF, the Vietcong was founded in the 1950s in direct response to the growing U.S. intervention in the region. Its primary goal was to overthrow the pro-American government and reunify Vietnam under a communist regime, aligning with the domino theory that aimed to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The Vietcong was made up of a diverse coalition of peasants, urban workers, former soldiers, and communist sympathizers. This blend of individuals allowed the Vietcong to leverage a wide local support network, facilitating recruitment and the essential logistics for a prolonged guerrilla war. Inspired by Sun Tzu's guerrilla teachings, the Vietcong leaders adopted tactics that countered the technological and numerical superiority of American forces. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of surprise, terrain knowledge, and morale, principles that the Vietcong meticulously applied to weaken their enemy. Initially, the Vietcong faced a significant disadvantage against the U.S. Army, which had advanced technology, unmatched air power, and a massive arsenal. The American forces, well-equipped and highly trained, seemed to have all the advantages in terms of conventional combat capability. However, the Vietcong understood that direct confrontation would be unsustainable, so they opted for a war of attrition. They used strategic ambushes, sabotage, and surprise attacks to wear down U.S. troops, avoiding direct engagements that might result in decisive defeats. The Vietcong's strategy was based on undermining the morale of U.S. troops and prolonging the conflict until public opinion in the United States turned against the war. This approach aligned with Sun Tzu's principles of winning without fighting and exhausting the enemy through indirect tactics. The Vietcong used their deep knowledge of the terrain and their ability to blend in with the local population to evade American forces, maintaining a constant presence and challenging the adversary's military superiority. As the war progressed, the Vietcong demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt to American tactics and technologies. The escalation of airstrikes and the use of advanced technologies by the United States forced the Vietcong to continually innovate their combat methods. They adopted rapid mobility tactics and focused on operational flexibility, allowing insurgent forces to respond quickly to enemy movements and exploit any weaknesses in U.S. lines. Additionally, the Vietcong strengthened their intelligence and counterintelligence networks, using information from the local population to anticipate and counter American operations. The creation of decentralized cells allowed for efficient communication and a quick response to threats, keeping the Vietcong a step ahead on the battlefield. This decentralized organizational structure also made it difficult for U.S. forces to identify and dismantle the insurgent network, thus prolonging the conflict. Leadership within the Vietcong was another crucial factor in their ability to adapt. Leaders such as Vo Nguyen Giap combined military strategies with a deep understanding of the psychology of war, motivating the troops and maintaining internal cohesion that strengthened their resistance against U.S. forces. Giap, with his pragmatic approach and ability to inspire guerrillas, ensured that the Vietcong could evolve their tactics and maintain operational effectiveness throughout the entire conflict. Cu Chi Tunnels, the Vietcong's underground fortress. During the Vietnam War, the Cu Chi Tunnels played a central role in the guerrilla tactics used by the Vietcong. This vast underground network, which stretched over 250 kilometers, allowed the Vietnamese fighters to effectively challenge the military superiority of U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Built between the 1940s and 1960s, the tunnels connected strategic areas from the outskirts of Saigon to the Cambodian border, serving as a secret base for combat operations, supply transport, and, most importantly, as shelters where the guerrillas could evade capture. The construction of these tunnels was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the Vietcong. Using basic tools and manual excavation techniques, the guerrillas worked under extremely difficult conditions, facing heat, humidity, and the constant risk of collapses. The tunnels were designed to be as discreet as possible, with entrances camouflaged under mounds of earth or hidden within dense vegetation, making them hard for enemy forces to detect. Life within the Cu Chi tunnels was not easy. The spaces were narrow and dark, with poor ventilation that made the air thick and hard to breathe. Despite these adverse conditions, the tunnels were equipped with essential facilities that allowed the guerrillas to live and operate for extended periods without needing to surface. Makeshift bedrooms, rudimentary kitchens, meeting areas, and even small underground hospitals were built to ensure that the fighters could remain operational and care for the wounded without exposing themselves to external dangers. One of the most notable aspects of the Cu Chi tunnels was their complexity and multifunctionality. The tunnel network not only served as shelter, but also as logistical and operational hubs. In these underground spaces, the guerrillas could plan attacks, store weapons and supplies, and coordinate strategic movements without being detected. This underground infrastructure allowed the Vietcong to maintain a constant presence and conduct operations effectively, despite the intense US military pressure. The strategy behind the Cu Chi tunnels reflected a deep understanding of guerrilla tactics and an ingenious adaptation to the circumstances of the conflict. By using these tunnels, the Vietcong could quickly move between different areas, avoid direct confrontations, and minimize human losses. Moreover, the tunnels provided a level of security that allowed the guerrillas to recover from injuries, resupply, and reorganize without the constant threat of air or ground attacks. The ability of the Cu Chi tunnels to protect the guerrillas and facilitate logistical operations was crucial to the sustainability of the insurgency. Despite their advanced reconnaissance and search technologies, US forces found it extremely difficult to locate and destroy the entire tunnel network. The adaptability and terrain knowledge of the Vietcong allowed them to rebuild and expand the tunnels even after attempts at eradication, thereby maintaining a significant strategic advantage throughout the conflict. Landmines, the hidden danger of the Vietcong. During the Vietnam War, traps and landmines became essential tools in the Vietcong's arsenal, enabling them to counter the military superiority of the United States and South Vietnam. These weapons not only posed a physical threat, but they were also instruments of psychological warfare designed to instill fear and demoralize enemy troops. Ingenious and cruel, the Vietcong's traps included everything from modified grenades to the infamous Bouncing Betty mine, each designed to maximize both the lethal and psychological impact on the battlefield. The Bouncing Betty mine, technically known as the S-mine, was particularly lethal due to its ability to rise into the air before detonating, dispersing shrapnel at a devastating height. Originally developed in Germany during World War II, the Vietcong acquired these mines by looting enemy arsenals and receiving clandestine support from international allies. Alongside the Bouncing Betty, the Vietcong employed improvised devices such as toe poppers, small mines designed to mutilate, and hidden tripwire traps that exploded at the slightest contact, increasing the constant danger on the ground. The Vietcong's creativity was not limited to the use of pre-existing mines. Improvised traps, like the grenade in a can, demonstrated their ability to turn everyday objects into deadly weapons. This device consisted of a hand grenade secured with a rubber band inside an empty can. When stepped on or handled, the pin would be released, triggering an unexpected explosion. These traps were difficult to detect, as they were camouflaged among foliage or hidden along frequented trails, making them even more lethal and effective. The impact of these tactics was devastating for both US and South Vietnamese forces. Every step in the jungle became a deadly lottery, creating constant psychological tension among soldiers. The uncertainty about the safety of every movement eroded morale and cohesion, forcing soldiers to proceed with caution and delaying their operations. This state of perpetual fear weakened operational effectiveness, in alignment with the Vietcong strategy of wearing down the enemy through indirect tactics. Punji Stakes, the lethal weapon of the Vietcong guerrilla. Punji stakes became one of the most feared weapons of the Vietcong during the Vietnam War, serving as a grim example of how simple and readily available materials could be transformed into instruments of lethal terror. These traps consisted of sharp bamboo stakes, buried in the ground and covered with leaves or dirt, designed to inflict severe wounds and sow fear among enemy forces. Their implementation reflected a combination of tactical ingenuity and strategic cruelty, aligning with the psychological warfare principles aimed at wearing down the enemy both physically and mentally. The punji stakes were strategically deployed along transit routes frequented by US and South Vietnamese troops, such as jungle paths or riverbanks. Their presence on these trails turned each step into a potential death trap, transforming the terrain into an invisible battlefield where danger lurked at every corner. Additionally, they were an integral part of the defenses around the Cu Chi tunnels, deterring enemy soldiers who attempted to infiltrate the Viet Cong's underground network. The precise location and camouflage of these stakes made them difficult to detect until it was too late, thus enhancing their lethal effectiveness. The impact of the punji stakes went beyond the physical injuries they caused. The constant threat of encountering a hidden trap generated a state of anxiety and paranoia among US soldiers, undermining their morale and confidence in the combat environment. The uncertainty about the safety of each step turned the Vietnamese jungle into a constant threat zone, eroding the troops' determination and cohesion. This state of perpetual fear weakened the operational effectiveness of the US forces, in line with the Viet Cong strategy of wearing down the enemy through indirect tactics. To increase the lethality of the punji stakes, Viet Cong guerrillas often coated them with deadly substances. These included poisons derived from local plants, human and animal feces, and other infectious agents that could cause severe infections and potentially fatal complications. This additional layer of danger meant that even a superficial wound could become life-threatening, prolonging the suffering and increasing the terror associated with these traps. The combination of physical damage and the risk of severe infections made the punji stakes a double threat, both immediate and long-term. Net and pit traps. Deadly ingenuity in the Vietnamese jungle. Net and pit traps represented some of the most cunning and effective tactics employed by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. These devices, while seemingly simple, combined lethal effectiveness with a profound psychological impact, creating a battlefield filled with uncertainty where every step could be fatal. Designed to incapacitate and terrify enemy troops, these traps reflected the ingenuity and adaptability of the Viet Cong in their fight against a militarily superior force. The net traps, also known as man-catchers, were a devastating way to capture and neutralize enemy soldiers. These traps consisted of large camouflaged nets, strategically laid on the ground and secured with hidden stakes. When a soldier walked over them, a hidden rope would tighten, lifting the individual off the ground and leaving them vulnerable. This sudden suspension not only caused physical damage, but also created a sense of helplessness and terror, exacerbating the psychological toll on the troops. A notable incident illustrating the brutality of these traps occurred in 1966 during Operation Attleboro in Tainan Province. US Sergeant Michael O'Brien and his squad were caught by a net trap while patrolling a heavily wooded area. Suddenly I found myself lifted into the air, hanging from a tree, not knowing what had happened, O'Brien recounted. Fortunately, his comrades managed to free him quickly, but the event left a deep psychological scar, highlighting the lethal ingenuity of the Viet Cong and the lasting impact of these tactics on US soldiers. In addition to the net traps, the Viet Cong also used pit traps designed to make soldiers fall into hidden pits or structures. These traps, often camouflaged with leaves or branches, were deployed in high-traffic areas, increasing uncertainty and danger. Soldiers never knew when they might fall into a trap, making it even more terrifying to move through hostile territory. These pit traps not only caused direct casualties, but also disrupted supply lines and military operations, hindering the continued advance of US troops. The ingenuity behind the Viet Cong's net and pit traps lay in their ability to exploit the environment and the predictability of enemy tactics. By camouflaging these traps in the natural terrain, the Viet Cong maximized their effectiveness without requiring significant effort in their implementation. The combination of physical and psychological elements made these traps a constant threat, forcing US troops to proceed with extreme caution and slowing their operations. Wire traps, invisible threat in the jungle. One of the deadliest and most stealthy tactics used by the Vietcong during the Vietnam War were wire traps, lethal devices that transformed the dense jungles into a minefield of terror and death. Taking advantage of the simplicity of available materials and the complexity of the jungle terrain, the Vietcong deployed traps such as the spring trap and the sliding trap, designed to cause devastating injuries and generate a constant atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Spring traps, also known as whip traps, were extremely lethal and efficient. Built with taut wire and connected to sharp objects such as metal hooks or spikes, these traps operated through a simple but highly effective mechanism. When a hidden wire was stepped on, the sharp object would be released with enough force to pierce the flesh, causing severe wounds or even instant death. Placing these traps on paths frequented by American and South Vietnamese troops turned every step into a potential deadly trap. An incident experienced by Private James O'Neill in 1966 exemplifies the brutality of these traps. While patrolling in Binh Duong province, O'Neill unknowingly triggered a spring trap. I didn't see the wire until it was too late. Suddenly I felt intense pain in my leg and looked down to see a metal hook deeply embedded in my calf, O'Neill recalled. Unable to walk due to the severity of the wound, he was evacuated by his comrades, but his experience underscores the lethality and psychological impact of these traps. In addition to spring traps, the Vietcong used sliding traps and tripwires that caused physical damage and had a profound psychological impact. The constant threat of falling into a wire trap created a permanent state of anxiety among the troops, who advanced with extreme caution and distrust. This uncertainty weakened morale and cohesion, reducing their operational effectiveness and slowing their missions. The ingenuity behind the Vietcong's wire traps lay in their ability to exploit the environment and the predictability of enemy tactics. Camouflaged among foliage or hidden on frequently traveled paths, these traps were difficult to detect until it was too late, increasing their lethal effectiveness. The combination of physical and psychological elements made these traps a constant threat, forcing American troops to advance with extreme caution and slowing down their operations. Biological terror, poisonous creatures, and Vietcong sabotage. The Vietcong demonstrated mastery in psychological warfare, employing not only physical traps but also poisonous creatures and sabotage tactics to spread panic and destabilize the morale of enemy forces. This combination of ingenious methods and strategic cruelty turned the Vietnamese jungle into a constant environment of fear for both American and South Vietnamese soldiers. Poisonous snakes, such as cobras and vipers, were strategically used by the Vietcong. Placed in backpacks, hidden in traps, or in resting areas, these dangerous creatures posed a constant threat. The aim was to create psychological terror that undermined the morale of the troops, who feared both enemy gunfire and unexpected encounters with deadly animals. This form of sabotage not only caused physical casualties, but also deeply affected the mental state of the combatants. A notable incident occurred in 1967 when Corporal John Harker, a U.S. Marine, was bitten by a poisonous cobra while patrolling in Quang Thai province. I felt a sharp pain in my arm and saw the snake slip out of my sight. Within minutes, my entire arm went numb and I could hardly move it, Harker recalled. Thanks to his team's swift intervention, which applied a tourniquet and requested a medical evacuation, Harker survived the attack. However, this event left a profound psychological mark on him and his fellow soldiers, increasing paranoia and a sense of vulnerability among the troops. In addition to poisonous creatures, the Vietcong implemented sabotage tactics that included poisoning food and water supplies. Guerrillas would place poison in water wells or food meant for soldiers, creating an atmosphere of constant distrust. This strategy not only caused physical harm, but also fostered a sense of paranoia, weakening the cohesion and operational effectiveness of both American and South Vietnamese troops. Brutal captivity, the horror of being a Vietcong prisoner. Being captured by North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War represented one of the most atrocious fates for American soldiers. Without a formal declaration of war, prisoners of war, POWs, were seen as foreign invaders, which justified the brutality employed against them. The North Vietnamese used severe physical punishments not only as a method of coercion to obtain military information, but also to force confessions of alleged war crimes. Torture methods included tying the prisoners' arms or legs with ropes until they were dislocated, keeping them with their feet shackled in iron restraints for weeks, and administering extreme beatings that often led to the prisoner's death. These ruthless practices were meant to break the physical and psychological resistance of American soldiers, leaving them in a constant state of despair. One of the most emblematic cases is that of the infamous POW John McCain. After surviving an air crash in 1967, McCain was captured by the Vietcong and spent 5 long years in captivity. His time as a prisoner was marked by brutal treatment and constant torture. Initially, he was treated by Vietnamese surgeons who caused irreparable damage to his leg, leaving him with severe nerve damage. After a partial recovery, McCain was subjected to physical punishment every 2 hours for 4 consecutive days. This torture regime broke his left arm and fractured his ribs, leaving visible and deep scars, both physical and psychological. McCain's experience was not unique. Many American soldiers faced similar situations, where the brutality of their captors sought not only to inflict physical pain, but also to destroy their will to resist. The inhumane conditions in the prisoner camps included extreme deprivation, lack of proper medical care, and the constant threat of violence exacerbating the soldiers' psychological trauma. The psychological warfare waged by the Viet Cong had a lasting impact on the prisoners. The constant fear of further torture and the uncertainty about their final fate created elevated levels of post-traumatic stress. McCain, for example, showed evident signs of trauma during his later political career, including physical difficulties such as limping due to inadequate surgery and limited mobility in his arms, reflecting the suffering he endured during his captivity. The legacy of these abuses also influenced the public perception of the Vietnam War in the United States. Stories of mistreated and tortured prisoners fueled growing discontent and opposition to the war, contributing to a shift in public opinion and eventually to the American withdrawal from the conflict. In addition to the physical damage, the brutality of the North Vietnamese left deep emotional scars on the soldiers. Constant exposure to violence and the inability to recognize their captors as complex human beings exacerbated psychological trauma, leading many to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and other mental health issues that persisted long after the war ended. The stories of soldiers like John McCain are powerful testimonies of human resilience in the face of extreme adversity. Despite suffering and injuries, McCain emerged as a symbol of perseverance and commitment, becoming a prominent figure in U.S. politics and advocating for reconciliation and understanding between nations. His personal experience highlights the magnitude of the pain and injustice that many prisoners of war faced during the conflict. In conclusion, the brutal treatment of American prisoners by the Viet Cong not only inflicted devastating physical damage, but also left deep psychological scars that affected soldiers throughout their lives. These torture and abuse tactics reflect a psychological warfare strategy designed to weaken the enemy from within, leaving a legacy of trauma and suffering that resonates in the collective memory of the Vietnam War. Invisible wounds, the psychological impact of the war. Psychological warfare stands as the central axis of the Vietnam conflict, where American forces not only fought a tangible enemy, but also an intangible threat that penetrated deeply into the minds of the soldiers. The Viet Cong, with its invisible and elusive nature, turned every day of combat into a battle against the unknown. Lacking a visible face and blending indistinctly with innocent civilians, the enemy became a constant presence of fear and paranoia. In the midst of the dense Vietnamese jungle, U.S. soldiers faced the constant risk of falling into explosive traps without warning. These traps, designed to inflict severe injuries or death, created a sense of perpetual insecurity. The uncertainty about the proximity of a lethal trap eroded morale and heightened stress, causing many soldiers to rely on drug use as a coping mechanism. This environment of constant threat affected not only their physical well-being, but also the mental health of the troops, leaving scars that would persist long after the conflict ended. The Viet Cong not only focused on physical damage, but also on destabilizing the mental strength of U.S. soldiers, Propaganda played a crucial role in this strategy. Guerrillas distributed eye-catching posters that featured national symbols such as the lotus flower, combined with images of destroyed American planes and the figure of Ho Chi Minh. These colorful, vibrant posters were spread across strategic areas, creating a narrative that confused the troops by making it difficult to distinguish FLN fighters from ordinary civilians. This indistinguishability generated a constant sense of threat, where any movement could trigger a deadly ambush. Distrust infiltrated US ranks, as each soldier had to remain alert not only to the visible enemy, but also to the possibility that a civilian might be part of the Vietcong. This duality increased tension and fear, hindering cohesion and the operational effectiveness of the troops. The fear of being captured by the FLN became a persistent shadow, keeping soldiers in a constant state of alertness and emotional fatigue. The psychological scars of the war manifested in erratic behaviors and a decrease in overall morale. Stories of soldiers who lost their sanity due to extreme stress and constant fear were common, illustrating the devastating impact of psychological warfare. The inability to distinguish between friends and enemies, the constant suspicion and the fear of the unknown undermined the trust and resilience of the troops, weakening their ability to fight effectively. The indescribable things the Viet Cong did to American soldiers during the Vietnam War left a deep mark on military history and the psyche of those who participated in the conflict. Deadly traps like punji stakes and wire traps, along with the use of venomous creatures and sabotage tactics, not only caused significant physical casualties, but also created a constant state of fear and anxiety among US troops. These psychological warfare strategies undermined morale and cohesion within the forces, creating an environment where every step could be the last. The psychological trauma resulting from facing such an ingenious and ruthless enemy left lasting scars on the soldiers. Stories like those of John McCain and Frank Harbert exemplify the physical and emotional suffering many endured, reflecting how the Viet Cong's tactics deeply affected US fighters. The constant uncertainty and fear of unexpected ambushes turned the Vietnamese jungle into a nightmare field, where survival depended as much on mental strength as it did on physical ability. These traumatic experiences not only influenced the lives of the soldiers, but also shaped public perception and subsequent US military policies. The relentless tactics of the Viet Cong demonstrated an advanced understanding of guerrilla warfare and an exceptional ability to adapt and overcome adversities, leaving crucial lessons about the nature of asymmetric conflict. And for things like these, the US military has nightmares, remembering the horrors and strategies they faced in a war where the enemy was not only formidable, but also ruthlessly ingenious.